Hey Panda Nation, what's happening? Peter Von Panda here. Hey, thought we'd take a little walk and I wanted to talk to you about something that I'm pretty excited about actually. As you know, I do a little painting, pretty much as a hobbyist. I've shown you some of the things. We've done some of the reviews on paintbrushes and things that have come across my desk and that I've purchased over the years. And I've done some paintings that were shown, something like this, or this, or this, or this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. So I've done a lot of things, but just purely as a hobbyist. My parents kind of gave me an appreciation for the art. But when I first did a painting as a kid, and maybe the first time something was worthy of framing, it was really a copy of a Van Gogh. And actually, this is a picture of the painting that I did. Still have it, did it a long time ago, and hardly a high quality copy, but the thing about Van Gogh is that, his style and that abstract style that he painted in was kind of easy to copy because it's a little sloppy and you don't have to do as much precision work as you would on something that's maybe photorealistic, right? But it started giving me appreciation for Van Gogh, and I ended up doing some more, and in fact, actually selling some, because obviously Van Gogh is quite popular, and including a couple paintings like Starry Night, as well as Cypress Among Wheat, which unfortunately I don't have a picture of it finished, but I did do that one too. So over the years I kind of have come to appreciate what Van Gogh was doing, and one of the things that ended up happening was about 5 years ago on Kickstarter, a Polish couple decided to create a movie about Van Gogh and kind of about his life and very much about his death, and tried to fundraise for it on Kickstarter. But the most interesting thing about it is what they wanted to do is do the whole movie in an animated style of Van Gogh's paintings. And I remember kind of the original Kickstarter pitch, and it was actually fairly modest. I thought they raised some money, but they wanted to have something like, 20 or 30 painters painting for a couple years because they wanted to do every frame in the movie as a painting. It turns out, though, that creating an animated movie where you paint every single frame of it is a tall order. And in fact, the movie was delayed and far more vast in terms of both cost as well as the number of painters that participated in it than I would have even guessed. And I want to say, actually, the movie called Loving Vincent, which is now done and is coming out in a variety of places, is something like 69,000 frames painted by something like 140 artists that worked for the last 5 years. Now, I don't know what the cost is, but you can imagine what it takes. Now, it's different than in a lot of animated movies where usually the background is a single cell and so it doesn't need to be reproduced every time. But in a painting, what they had to do is paint a painting and then take a snapshot of it, paint all of the differences, the iteration and the delta for that frame, take another picture of it, and so you can understand how difficult that can be. It also means, interestingly, that you don't get a lot of time for your individual painting, and it also means, surprisingly, that you don't end up with a lot of paintings at the end of the painting, right? So what ends up happening is, even though they had 69,000 total frames, and I will tell you that the frame rate, I think it was about 20 frames per second for the movie, it only really came down to about 800 to 1,000 paintings because you're reusing that same canvas all the time. Now, what I really found intriguing is that they decided to do some things with the canvases that were left over. One, a few of them, a couple hundred of them, I think, are part of a Loving Vincent exhibit. Hopefully it'll come around to various museums. It's somewhere in Europe right now, so it'd probably be really interesting to see that, as well as kind of see the essence of the movie and kind of the vast size of the work that went into it. A couple of hundred of them ended on frames that probably weren't that interesting. So if you can think about a flip book, the only thing you really end up with is the last picture on that flip book. So if it's not a very interesting last frame, the whole painting is kind of not very interesting because you've hidden all of the previous frames. And a few hundred of them were kind of interesting. And so what they did with some of those that weren't part of the exhibit or weren't deemed not very artistic in nature, they sold some of them on the Loving Vincent website. And so you can go out and buy some of those. Now the prices on those paintings range from 1,000 to 10,000 euros, I think is kind of the ballpark range. But if you wanted to have a piece of history, piece of an animated film that will probably never be done again, primarily because of the cost, time, expense, and just sheer manpower required, then you can go out to check out Loving Vincent and pick up one of these paintings that was remainder from the production yourself. Now, here's the trick. A lot of them have been sold. Last time I was on the website, which was this morning, there weren't actually that many paintings left. And of the ones that were left, they were at the higher price points generally. I think 5,000 to 7,500 euros. So not exactly giveaways, but they're interesting. And the ones with people in them are the ones that end up being more expensive. Now, the good news is, pandas, I was able to purchase one, which I now have. So let's take a look at it and talk about what we have here. Here it is. Here's the painting that I purchased, and it just came to me and came via DHL. It was very well packaged. Thank you to the people of Loving Vincent for taking such good care of these. Now, like I said, there aren't a lot of paintings at the end of the production, and there aren't a lot for sale. And one of the keys here is that this painting can represent a much different amount of time. So I think some of them were only a few seconds. This one here, as you might be able to see here, says in the markings on the side that it's 416 total frames. Now, at 20 frames a second, that says to me that this is about 20 seconds of the movie. So it's actually probably a fairly long period of time. What that also says to me is that there probably wasn't a lot of full picture change, because just to do 416 individual paintings would be a lot. So my guess is that there's very little movement in this, and it's called I Wouldn't Think So by Anna Walrus, something like that. I know I've got that pronunciation wrong. I think she's Polish. She is an illustrator and a muralist. She has a Facebook page, Ania Walrus. I'll put a link to it in the description, but I started following her. Obviously, her work is really, really interesting. Everything was done in oils, as far as I understand, and all of the painters that worked on the painting had to go to the production company to do some training so that they could all have a consistent style. So one of the things that you might notice here is that if someone's only doing a few seconds, if a painter's only doing a few seconds, that's going to be married up to another animation sequence from another painter. You want them to look consistent, otherwise it's going to be very, very jarring. Now, I've seen some of the the video and rolled some of that through there, and it looks pretty consistent. The Vincent van Gogh style probably isn't the hardest one to replicate. I even think actually some of the more photorealistic sequences, which are flashbacks, which are not done in the Van Gogh style, are probably even a little harder to do from a technical standpoint, but I think the consistency works out right. Now, when you're watching the movie, I think it has a bunch of that rotoscoping. It's very animated, and so I've heard some people say it's a little distracting, but I think the point is, it's a painting coming to life, so it's just kind of the nature of what you're going to see. In the clips I've seen, I've never had a problem. I think you'll kind of get lost a bit in the story, hopefully. Now, again, like I said, this is I think a little bit longer one, maybe 20 seconds of film. And so what I think is we have the main protagonist here, Armand Rouland, I think is his name, and I'm not sure who this lady is. We'll find out, but it looks like maybe they're having a dialogue, and so the animation is really mostly in the area of where the people are, kind of facial movements, hand movements, and things like that. And since you're painting a painting and then making some of the individual changes, what you'll probably get is a lot of paint buildup where those the animation changes were. Now, one thing I will note here is that when I got it, I actually expected this painting to be much thicker. Even though this is a high number of frames, where some of them probably didn't have as many frames, I expected really kind of thick paint to be built up because it can take years to do these paintings. This is actually, it's not nearly as thick. Now, I can tell in some of these areas where there is a significant amount of paint, like right up here in her face, and this window we have quite a bit of paint, and then down here on him we have quite a bit of paint, and then in various other areas, particularly right here. So I think there's maybe quite a bit of animation done right in here because of the thickness. But otherwise, it's not this huge caked on layer. I mean, if you paint rocks, the spirit rock at your college or something, or at a monument, you know how thick that paint can get. So I'm really impressed with how little paint there is for the total number of frames, and then that can vary very much. The other thing is, I noticed that this is not a canvas. It is kind of like a one of those fiber boards, you know, so it's a pretty thick piece of material. That's also probably intentional to make sure that it doesn't warp over time, especially with the amount of paint you're putting down on it. Certainly not instead of using a canvas. I've noticed that there are holes drilled in all this. It's just kind of interesting to see all these details, which you wouldn't get in a normal painting, but it just kind of gives you an appreciation for the work they've done. So there's 6 holes at least, and I have a feeling that those are drilled and mounted to the easel that they're using, so you don't have any movement. There are also these 4 squares in the corner. I'm sure those are for alignment, you know, so that every picture can be taken and automatically aligned. And then I noticed that there's some markings on the side, Walus, which I think is the artist's name, and then a date, 2016, July 20th here, and then 10:30. So I'm kind of assuming that's an end time since the movie is just coming out. And I'm not sure what those numbers are, but confirmation that Anna's painting is legit here. And then I've also noticed that there's some inscriptions on the side here, just notes I think for production, projector 96%, scale 94%, you know, particularly depending on what size canvas an artist is working on. Some of them can be a little different, and obviously they all have to be stretched or shrunk to make sure that they fit in the film. And like I said, total number of frames 416, but also right here there's an interesting note, 324 transition starts. So what's interesting about this painting and why it's so dark is that I think it starts as a kind of a color scene, but then either fades to black and white or fades out. And that's why it's so dark. And so what ends up happening, I think in the film, because what they're doing is they've shot live action for everything and overlaying that with the projector, and then starting to transition here at the 324th frame, is that at that image, she started not just painting the animation, but also darkening up all the colors. So that's where I think a lot of the work would come in, where she's probably darkening almost everything in the painting from frame 324 to the end of frame 416, which is the reason here that there is color, particularly noticeable in the yellow on Armand's jacket, and then kind of the blue or the green in her shirt here, and then a kind of a white wall in the background. So you still have some color, and if you were to kind of wipe away the last 100 layers of paint, you'd probably have a very vibrant, normal picture from the movie. Now, what that does, and why I really was intrigued by it, is it makes it really unique in terms of almost all the other paintings. So there's kind of some black and white sequences, and then there are the very rich, vibrant color sequences kind of in that Van Gogh style. And this is kind of very unique. And the other thing I really liked about it is to have the protagonist in the painting, I think really ties it together. So if you see the movie and then you were to see this painting kind of in a vacuum, you might say, hey, isn't that the guy from the movie? So I kind of liked that visual and obvious tie-in as well. Now the other thing I will say here is that the board itself is pretty big, and so if you're thinking about ordering one of these, I'll just give you the dimensions on this particular board. It's basically 2 feet tall. It's 23 3/4 inches tall, and then wide it is 40.5 inches wide. So it's a pretty big board overall, but the painting itself, and you can see they scribed some pencil lines in here to make sure that they were in it. And even, you can on the bleed edge here, I can see kind of this yellow tan at the very back. It looks like the very first layer. So my guess is that the 20 seconds or so of video that this ends up filming, that this ends up representing, started very bright, and this was probably like a wood color at the top and the bottom, because I'm getting that kind of much lighter, brighter colors all the way in the back, and then I can see kind of where the dark layer stops. But in terms of the painting itself, we're looking at 20 inches tall by 27 inches wide. So hopefully that represents the aspect ratio of the film, or I'm not sure if they crop it a little bit, but the actual usable picture is that size. Now, the other thing I've noticed in looking at the pictures of the different paintings you can buy is that I think the painter may have decided where to center the painting, or kind of in the area of the board to work, because what I've noticed here is that it's actually closer to the bottom than it is to the top. And so what we have is the painting offset to the bottom, and I've noticed that some seem to be in kind of a different, slightly different location on the board. I think these are what kind of compensates for that. But if you are going to buy one of these and then mat it and frame it, and you wanted to mat away all of the production type of material, either you're going to have to kind of cut off the edge, or what I might do is create another spacer to kind of lift up the bottom, because I have my characters so far close to the bottom. I have kind of some dead space up here, which I wouldn't mind lifting this up, but I would like to not cut off the characters if possible. So I may actually raise this up and have a bigger, kind of put a spacer about an inch or something on the bottom, so that I can really center the frame, the painting, and keep the characters in the picture. The other thing is, you could just frame it the way it is. It's kind of cool to have, I think, you know, the production, you know, spillage and collateral around the side. It just kind of shows the human investment in it, and it's really, really cool. So I really like it. I'm really excited that I was able to get one. Obviously, if you want to put down some money, you can still get one too, but it's kind of cool that the movie's coming out here shortly. It's playing in most major cities for 1 or 2 nights, depending on the size of the city. So I know it's playing in Detroit, it's playing here in Chicago at the Music Box Theater. I think they just announced that they're playing it somewhere in LA for a day. So if you want to see it, you know, go to Loving Vincent's website and check out show times. Even internationally, they've got some listings there as well, and so you can absolutely see it. I'm not sure how wide a release it will be afterwards, or when it will come out on video. So if the concept of the movie is interesting to you, maybe you're an art lover in general, maybe you're a Van Gogh lover in general, maybe you're an animation junkie, or just want to see something that just took an enormous amount of time and work, then I would definitely say that Loving Vincent is probably going to deliver on that. And I'm also looking forward to kind of seeing the concept of the story. I think it's funny is that even though I like Van Gogh's work, I really don't know that much about him. So what I didn't realize is that there's some controversy over whether he committed suicide. I think that's kind of the conventional wisdom. That's the assumption I always had. But the movie's going to explore a little bit about his death, because I think kind of the most modern theory is that he was murdered and did not commit suicide. So that's kind of interesting. So I'm interested in learning a lot more about that. But really excited about this. I'm going to put the link to the Loving Vincent website. You can also check out a couple of other videos that I think are really impressive. Loving Vincent also has a YouTube channel where they not only announce the paintings that they release, which is how I discovered this, but then also has some background you know, videos and behind the scenes videos and trailers. So I'm going to link to those because I don't want to create copyright infringements. But there's also, which is kind of strange that I found this, but it was just in Googling, that Doctor Who had an episode about Vincent van Gogh, and and apparently it's widely acclaimed as one of the best Doctor Who episodes ever. So I've seen some clips of that. It's pretty interesting. So definitely check that out as well. But I'll put a link to that. So there it is, Loving Vincent. Fully painted, animated movie, just mind-boggling in terms of the scale, the scope, and hopefully the beauty. So I'm looking forward to check it out. Peter Von Panda, out.